So welcome to Ethical Sourcing, Sustainability at its Origin, a series of lightning talks. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of our colleagues around the world. My name is Deborah Jane, and I am the Outreach Coordinator for the Institute for Global Studies at the University of Minnesota. I'm joined by my colleagues from the Center for Global Studies at the University of Washington, Jackson School of International Studies, the Center for European Studies at the University of Florida, the Center for Latin American Studies at the University of Florida, and the Institute for Regional and International Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The speakers in this series will discuss their experience or research in ethical sourcing in relation to Europe, Africa, Latin America, or globally. Individuals taking small steps towards combating climate change in our everyday lives can make big impact over time. One of those steps is awareness of companies sourcing. How are the companies we frequent sourcing their supply chains? How are they protecting local resources? How are they empowering their consumers to combat climate change with their wallets? Join our speakers as they cover these topics and more in this series of lightning talks from a global perspective. Brief housekeeping notes to start with. Each speaker will present for about 15 minutes with time for 1 or 2 questions following each talk. These questions should be put in the chat. Also, the series is being recorded and it will be shared on our center's websites. Without further ado, let's begin. Our first speaker is Jiao Lo. Her talk is titled From Social Responsibility to Social Impact. Dr. Lo is an associate professor of strategic management and entrepreneurship at the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. Her research examines when and how firms participate in corporate social responsibility, CSR, activities and the social impact of these activities. Dr. Lo serves as an associate editor at the Strategic Management Journal and currently chairs the Stakeholder Strategy Interest Group for the Strategic Management Society. With that, I will hand it over to Dr. Lo.
Thank you, Deborah. Can everyone see me and hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. All right. Thanks so much for Deborah for the kind introduction, and thanks to Phil and all the organizers for inviting me to do the lightning talk. I'm Jiao Lo, I'm associate professor at the University of Minnesota, and my work primarily is in the space of social, corporate social responsibility and social impact. So I will, discuss how this applies to ethical sourcing, but also hopefully open up to the CSR activity, which is, they're all very connected. I also really love this idea and love this this group. Prior to the Carlson School, my background was in public affairs at international affairs. So really delighted and look forward to the feedback. I understand from Deborah that I have about 10 minutes, and I look forward to the 5 minutes of questions and interaction. So I want to start by just talk about this, right, in terms of ethical sourcing, sustainability, in terms of all kinds of CSR activities, the recognition that many firms are actively engaged in many different kinds of CSR activities. I'm going to use CSR and ESG interchangeably for the rest of the talk. And there's also a great deal of evidence from research, and we've been at it for about 20, 30 years, right? Various different methodology, different contexts, letting us, showing us that CSR leads to superior financial performance. Now, for example, in the context of what we're talking about today in ethical sourcing, there's, this Forbes article in 2021, but there has been a lot of research, both survey or, experimental work, where you look at whether, the benefit of ethical sourcing. Of course, ethical sourcing is going to be more costly for the firms, but, do the consumers actually care, right? Do they have higher willingness to pay for firms that is, actively engaging ethical sourcing? The answer is a resounding yes, right? So we now it is in this generation that the consumer really care about it. The employees, right, are really proud to be part of a firm that is engaged in ethical sourcing. It's very possible that ethical sourcing would also give you better, higher quality products. And the systems you're putting to the supply chain infrastructure is actually going to pay off in the longer run. So there's lots and lots of reasons why this can be very good for the firm. Now, really win-wins everywhere, right? And we can have firms proactively engage with stakeholders in various different domains, as well as achieving financial performance. Now, that's a great kind of progress we made in the last 20, 30 years in this area, both in terms of research and in terms of practice. Now, the conversation, at least the conversation that I've seen, right, has been having a little bit of asking a second question, right, which is an important question in that. Now, do we have evidence about, or what do we know about the social impact of CSR activity? In other words, do these good intentions actually lead to kind of social welfare? And that is something that's harder, right? And I would argue that the evidence of CSR delivering positive social impact is much less. Not to say it doesn't exist, but it is much less, just because it is a harder question. But I think a lot of conversation recently has been about, how do we think about this gap between CSR and social impact, right? So good intentions are necessary, but they're not sufficient to achieve social welfare. Then, how do we navigate that? Let me spend a minute in talking about why is this important. I do think that shift of conversation is quite important because, for practitioners, right, there's really, two kinds of motivations to do kind of sustainability, ESG, or engage in these activities. One is, it's for the financial benefits, right? As we know, there are financial benefits of, as a lot of evidence has suggested. But then you always have folks kind of be a little bit more critical, right? And talk about, oh, it's just all about greenwashing, right? At the same time, I know a lot of folks who's engaged is trying to make the social impact and trying to kind of make the world a better place. So really, by shifting and carefully examine the social impact of these activities, we allowed the opportunity to effectively deal with the criticism of greenwashing, right? Which I'm sure for folks who work in this area is something that's quite familiar. And I know that there's also business educators and researchers on the call, and really the shift towards social impact allows us to kind of shift the focus of business school CSR education from, kind of letting managers know that this is a good thing to do, but also to teach them how to do it effectively. And lastly, it does enable us to hold CSR efforts more accountable, either as consumers or as employees, right? So it allows us to reward efforts that are truly producing positive social welfare. It avoids the pooling of effective and ineffective social activities, CSR activities, which might potentially lead to unraveling of the system. We have, movement and counter movement towards it, and to be able to provide better evidence for social impact, I think is going to be very, very necessary next step. So how do we do this? I'm gonna, leave this. Happy to kind of talk about this in detail. But really, in my work, there are 4 things that I think are very, very important. One is about thinking about the substantiveness of these activities. The dimension that, how do we prove that this is not just lip service? Are we actually monitoring these outsourcing? Are we holding folks accountable? The second dimension is how do we think about, let's say if we increase the safety of workers in our sourcing, but also increase carbon emission, is that a positive thing? How do we measure the offsetting benefits? Number 3 is inclusivity, right? When we go with ethical supply chain in one community, what's the impact on the other community, right? Can we, also be mindful of that and measure that in some extent? And lastly, comparative advantage, which is, does it make sense for us to do this on our own, or under what circumstances should we do this in collaboration with the government, with other companies, with the local community? So all of those 4 dimensions are stuff that I think will be quite necessary. And there are some best practices which I will skip in the interest of time, and I'll close thank you for your attention and look forward to your question.
Dr. Loh, do you see those questions in the Q&A at the bottom?
Not yet.
Okay, there's one that's been posted there. Maybe I could just see him. I don't know because I'm the host, but it says from somebody.
Yeah.
Of consumers to pay more, or is it only a stated intention?
So yeah, thank you for the question, Catherine. Well, why should the quality be better when sourced ethically? It doesn't have to be, but there are some work or some research, or in cases of companies such as Patagonia, right? Or one of the argument is that when sourcing ethically, we're also able to be more selective in terms of the number of supplier we work with, and be able to help them to improve the quality and so on and so forth. So it's not a should, but it could be a possible benefit. The second question is, can product launches actually confirm the willingness? Right, that's a great question. So great question in terms of the intention versus measurement. Now, I think it really depends on how the products are being launched, right? And there are some really convincing experimental work in the lab where they were able to look at exact same products, and if you kind of include information on ethical sourcing, and would that actually increase the willingness to pay for consumers? The answer seems to be kind of a positive one. What's interesting, however, oh yes, there's a question about, can you repeat the question? Okay, Catherine question, the second question is, can product launch actually confirm the willingness of consumers to pay more, or is it only stated intention? So the empirical research in this domain shows that one, currently the kind of, if you keep the product the same, but include information about ethical sourcing, it does seem to help with consumers' willingness to pay. So that's the current research I'm seeing. Now, how would you launch it for your actual product? That obviously will depend on the type of product, and how would you kind of there's some ideas about less is more, right, including less is better, and some ideas about potentially using emotional appeals rather than numbers is actually better, at least for the current kind of generation of consumers.
Any other questions for Dr. Loh before we move on? All right, thank you very much, Dr. Loh. I appreciate you taking the time here in this icy Minnesota day to come and join us. So our next speaker is Mauricio Chavarria Osorio. His talk is Water Facilitation in Latin America. Mauricio is an executive with expertise in leading strategic communications and sustainability initiatives that transform lives, enhance reputation, and secure corporations' social license to operate. After moving to Washington, D.C., he began collaborating with Global Environment and Technology Foundation, leading the creation and launch of Alidos para el Agua, and I apologize for the pronunciation. I think you will correct me there. So a platform that brings together projects seeking to promote healthy watersheds and increase access to water, sanitation, and hygiene for 2 million people by 2030 through inclusive and collective action. Now I'll turn it over to Mauricio.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. You said it correctly. Let me just, yes, my name is Mauricio Chavarria. Can you see my screen? Just let's start there.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. I'm going to just share with you my experience facilitating water in Latin America through a platform that we recently created for one of our donors, which is the Coca-Cola Foundation. I am Mauricio, I'm Salvadoran. After working for many years in the private sector, doing something similar to what Dr. Luo just shared about it, from social responsibility projects up to sustainability projects. And now I changed side and started collaborating for GETF. I'm going to introduce it shortly. So for today, I would like to cover four questions. What is water facilitation, the basics? What's the state of Latin America in terms of access to water? And then how we approach solutions for it. And you are going to see pictures of more than 24 projects that we executed last year. So the first topic, it's just like to standardize concepts. It's what is water facilitation, and in my perspective, is any efforts that is supporting the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which is related to safe water access, hygiene, and sanitation. And that takes us to one concept that probably not many people know, and that the threshold is to provide access of 20 liters per day to households. That's the minimum that projects that of the community they are working towards that are looking for. That's and then why does it matter? And it matters because first, the human right to water, and secondly, there is a potential. There is tons of opportunities for everyone to collaborate. Initially, everyone thought that governments were going to solve the problem, but nowadays we know that we need the civil society, the nonprofits, the private sectors, and of course academia involved in order to speed up these goals. What's the situation in Latin America? And I'm not trying to make you feel bad about it. Don't get sad. We're working to improve this. Latin America and the Caribbean, they hold a third of the freshwater resources of the whole world. But the region is facing increasing water stress everywhere, from droughts in north of Mexico, Chile, and areas in Brazil. And you can tell that Chile and Mexico are the most affected, but also Argentina, Bolivia, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, my home country, El Salvador, Guatemala, Paraguay, and Venezuela. And in numbers, the UN estimates that between 125 to 145 million people lack access to safe water. What are the challenges in short? And you can take a look of one of the pipes that we have unburied in San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas at the south of Mexico, completely rusted and producing a lot of leaks. So mainly the problems are related to over extraction of groundwater resources, increase in water demands because of highly concentrated human populations, inadequate water quality with very limited treatment, insufficient infrastructure for water distribution, and inequities around water and sanitation access. That's in short, the reality. And then why do we believe that we are making a difference? We believe in coalitions, and coalitions promote real action when they work together: governments, NGOs, communities, the private sector, and academia. So how do make this happen? I collaborate with GETF, which is a leader in galvanizing multi-sector water partnerships. And till this date, we have been able to impact more than 14 million people around the world with different platforms that we operate, including Women for Water, which is a platform that is providing in improving health, education, income generation for women after they have access to water. Our presence through Aliados por el Agua, or Allies for Water, you said it correctly, Deborah, is this platform. We created it for the Coca-Cola Foundation, and through it, we were able last year to execute 33 projects working with 27 organizations. And that's part of the beauty of having platforms, because everyone executing projects are working in a standard way with the same monitoring and evaluation framework and reporting equally similar. So you can compare a project in Topo Chico, Nuevo León, in the north of Mexico, to a project in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Through these 33 projects, we impacted more than 340,000 people just last year. And we collaborate with multiple type of organizations, regional organizations, very local ones, or global ones like WWF. But everyone is doing their part. And what we do in the creation of these platforms is setting a set of standards as minimums of reporting and a minimum of execution, so the donors can have integrated reporting services from GETF. Our presence this year in the region has expanded. We are not only working with Allies for Water from Coca-Cola, but we are also starting projects in Brazil, collaborating with Cargill, with the Hilton Foundation in Brazil too, and also opening a new project in Guayaquil in Ecuador. What do we do in general terms? We provide water for clinics and schools. We provide rain harvesting systems whatever that works for schools, for households. We also have created leak detection squads that detect and repair leaks across cities. We also support household connections for utility providers, community water tanks as backup systems whenever cities are not able to provide water 24 hours a day. Then water purification kiosks as a way of having clean water for drinking water in communities. We also promote hand washing trainings, reforestation activities, restoration of wetlands, and we also work in making efficiencies in agriculture production. And as I said, through Women for Water, we are taking a step more in depth in what women can get after they have access to water. And then just a few photos of a water purification station in Oaxaca, Mexico, and another student in Mexico that got access to water through rain harvesting systems. And I'm going to open it up for questions.
Apparently, I can't post a question myself in the chat, but I was curious when you listed all those interventions, which ones are the most successful or the ones that are working the best?
Well, last year, the most successful one was the one in San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas. In San Cristobal, more or less 250,000 people live there, and we were able to reach 90,000 people with improved water services. We did that working not only with the utility provider in the city, but also with the centralized utility providers that are run by civil society organizations. We also created that squad detecting leaks across San Cristobal that has very old infrastructure, and we started just replacing those pipes and providing more water for communities without the need to extract more water. We were using better the water available. Anyone else? And I can see no questions so far.
I actually have one more, if this is okay. I'm curious.
Of course.
And so the Women to Water that you did there, that organization, are there a lot of women participating in that organization, is making it happen? I'm just curious about the connection to like the women as water protectors with different indigenous groups, and if there's any connection that way.
So what we did is that we integrated the Women for Water framework into all our projects in Latin America. And what that means is that the targets of as beneficiaries are women and girls mostly. And then we have different type of interventions in order to help them improve their health, their economy, their education and access to several services in their communities. We do that through training sessions and through productive activities that we promote. The water kiosks are just one of them, but we have also trained women in communities, women in Argentina, just to give an example, in electricity. They are now providing services within their own communities and making money out of it in order to pay for the services that they now got through access to water. In Cochabamba, in Bolivia, we trained women to do plumbing connections. So all the connections that we did in the city were provided by women, and now they can also offer their services locally, and so forth. So those are the type of the interventions that are focused for that group and that are supporting communities to not also get access to water, but something else.
I have a question. I'm one of the co-hosts, so I'll just jump on screen and use that prerogative to ask directly. I just wanted to know, Mauricio, in terms of background, I know that, or in context, I know that there are many parts of Latin America that are experiencing drought as a part of climate change. Could you maybe talk about some of those places and how your work is focused on there, or kind of trying to ameliorate some of those issues where the climate change is affecting, the water situation?
Certainly. We're currently running projects in the border of Mexico with the US, so Tijuana and Ciudad Juarez. And those are cities that are facing droughts for many years. So in those locations, we are working to facilitate drinking water access, so making the water access closer to communities that had never accessed through pipes, and they are purchasing water through trucks, which is very expensive and not very hygienic. So working with the local utility providers, we're creating these water kiosks where people are going to be able to have access within moving more than 10, 15 minutes, which is our goal. In Tijuana, this is a city that has a lot of drought. They are rationing the water for the city. Over there, we're improving infrastructure. Similarly to what we did in San Cristobal, trying not to lose as much water, so the water that they have available, it's not lost through leaks or damage the infrastructure like tanks. We have also worked in areas in Chile that are facing droughts, and over there we rehabilitated a desalination station that was created many years ago for a community of 5,000 people. Now that community is hosting more than 30,000 people, 6 times the population that the plant was designed for. So we rehabilitated, we made it modern, just to make it short. In over there, that's the solution that it's available for them. So it's a very expensive solution everywhere. That's probably the most expensive, and but it's working. In the way that we did it is organizing the community and teaching them how to operate it, and we installed like modern controls and automatized everything. But if there is a need for maintenance or repair, the community is already hands-on on that, working with the municipality. So that's those are the areas that I have worked recently that are facing drought. And also in other areas in Mexico, we're trying to make the most out of rain. So we're installing rain harvesting systems whenever it rains, so people can have access to additional sources of water in their homes or at schools.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I'm from San Diego, so I certainly think about water situation. Kind of prompts my question, but yes, in Tijuana too. Yeah, of course. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I'm just seeing if there's any other questions. Okay, doesn't appear to be. Okay. Well, thank you, Mauricio. And I think we'll now move to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Stacey Schukar. Her talk is Global Sustainability and Compliance in Retail. Stacey is the Assistant Vice President and General Merchandise Manager for Costco Wholesale's International Department. She comes with over 17 years of experience with global supply chain management for Costco, supporting the company's international operations in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and Europe. She is focused on developing infrastructure to help support the company's expanding global business through such things as supplier and item development, strategic production planning, inventory management and logistics, and customs compliance, to name a few. Stacey, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Phil. Good morning, everyone. As Phil said, my name is Stacey Schukar, and I'm the Assistant Vice President and General Merchandise Manager for our International Division at Costco. And today I'll just be giving a brief overview of our global sustainability and compliance efforts as it relates to some of what Costco is focused on in the retail space. And I think it's important to mention, we are just one retailer. I do know, we work in a retail community with a lot of other stores, and a lot of companies have very similar efforts. So just trying to give everybody a bit of a taste on, what we're really focused on in the supply chain. So we can go to the next slide. And you can kind of just keep clicking a few here. We have a few buckets to show, but when thinking of sustainability within the supply chain and our operations, we are focused on several drivers, everything from emissions to supply chain mapping to sustainable packaging. And I'll be touching briefly on each of these buckets today. So if you can go to the next slide. At Costco, we believe in taking a holistic approach to sustainability that directly feeds into our code of conduct requirements, along with our sustainability development goals and guiding principles, otherwise known as SDGs to us. At Costco, sustainability to us means remaining a profitable business while doing the right thing. This is a quote from our CEO, Craig Jelinek. There's absolutely a balance between the two, but we do feel that sustainability efforts and business and retail go hand in hand, and that we can make an effort here. And while that right thing continues to expand and evolve, the basics of our code of ethics remain the same, which for us means first and foremost, obeying the law in all of the countries we do business in, taking care of our members, taking care of our employees, respecting our suppliers, and then ultimately we'll reward our shareholders, we feel, if we do all these other things right. When thinking of SDGs and the role in the business sector, it is important to understand that there are many global challenges that are in need of solutions that the private sector can help deliver on, which represents a large and growing market for business innovation. We feel that no matter how large or small a company is, whatever industry they're in, all can contribute to making positive impacts on these SDG goals. And then some of the SDGs that are most relevant to Costco are clean water and sanitation, decent work and economic growth within our supplier network, reduce inequalities in the workforce, responsible consumption and production. We take a look at climate action, taking care of life below the water, and then taking care of life on land. And our sustainability principle, number one, is that for Costco to thrive, the world needs to thrive. We are committed to doing our part. We are a global leader. We are a global company that sources products from around the world, and we very much care about the impact we make on the world. And all of our sustainability efforts, and this is probably the most important thing, really involve our supplier network. We could not do this alone. It's a complex world out there, and we all need to do our part. Sustainability principle number two for Costco is that we like to focus on issues related to our business where we feel we can contribute to real results-driven positive impacts. For our operations, and that's our retail warehouses and our home office operations, we've developed what we call the STAR program. This helps keep us focused and is intentionally limited to 5 impactful things that we feel we can make progress towards, from making sure that we are complying with environmental regulations, that we're taking a look at water conservation efforts, and we've developed a management program for that. We're focused on waste diversion, keeping waste out of the system, whether that's, a lot of those going into recycling or whatnot. We're focused on energy and refrigeration efficiencies and emissions monitoring and improvement within our own business. And then secondly, on the merchandising and buying side, which is really more my space, we're really focused on 6 questions that I'll go into a little further in the coming slides. Our sustainability principle number 3 is that we don't have all the answers today. We're learning as we go and we seek continuous improvement. And I feel that forums like this are just a great opportunity to share learnings amongst different channels in the industry on how we can continue to push ourselves here. But working together this past year with our supplier base, we feel we have made progress and are continuing to improve and learn from each other. Next slide, please. The first question that we must ask ourselves and our supplier community, and this is a very important one that will kind of preside on all of the different buckets that I had mentioned, is whether we can map our supply chain from source to origin. Production and supply chains can often be complicated with many layers in the process. It is important that we challenge both ourselves and suppliers to better understand how goods are sourced. Depending on the commodity, there can sometimes be 4 to 5 tiers within the supply chain. And within each of these tiers, it's important to ask these next questions. How are the people cared for? How are the animals cared for? How is the environment cared for? Is the best possible packaging being used? And what are the emissions and plans to reduce? And the only way to answer these questions is to really be able to map that supply chain. And next, we take a look at how the people are cared for. As a retailer with operations, logistics, and merchandise supply chains spanning the globe, we recognize the impact we have on human rights of individuals directly and indirectly. We have adopted policies and procedures around key human rights topics that are guided by our code of ethics. For example, we recognize that a leading cause of modern slavery is the unethical recruitment of workers, often involving workers charged excessive fees for their jobs, retention of their passports and other personal documents, and workers that are sometimes deceived regarding the terms and conditions of their employment. At Costco, we have an entire department dedicated to our code of conduct that we've built around ensuring the ethical treatment of people that we do business with. Our code of conduct was established to protect the human rights and safety of the people who produce, process, harvest, and transport products we sell, while recognizing and respecting cultural and legal differences worldwide. This code applies to all of our suppliers, and we employ the use of third-party audits to ensure this compliance. And then next slide, we take a look at how the animals are cared for. And for Costco, this means focusing on the 5 domains for assessing their welfare, which are nutrition, environment, their health, their behavior, and their overall mental state. We have a number of policy and goals we have put in place to make continual efforts in this space, everything from limiting antibiotic use in beef and poultry, dairy and poultry animal welfare audits, cage-free eggs, and challenging ourselves to increase the percentage we source. That's a tricky one because, being a global retailer and sourcing from all over the world, certain industries aren't as far along as maybe we are here in the US, but we still feel compelled to partner with that supplier community to teach, to educate, and bring them along as we strive to increase that penetration with cage-free. We take a look at ethical sourcing of down. We're focused on pork and open pen gestation goals, which strives to reduce the time sows spend in breeding stalls during pregnancy and provides open space for them to roam, feed, and socialize. And finally, we partner on research and development contributions to ensure the health and growth of the honeybee population, understanding how critical they are for populating approximately 1/3 of the global food supply chain. And the next slide, we take a look at how the environment is cared for and the impacts to clean water, fisheries, and life on land. For seafood and aquaculture, we have 3 primary objectives when it comes to sourcing: continually improving the sustainability of our seafood from either wild fisheries or farmed aquaculture in ways that enable us to meet current demands without compromising the availability of future sources, ensuring that the human rights, safety, and dignity of the people who produce, process, and harvest, and protecting our marine and coastal and freshwater ecosystems, limiting the impact associated with aquaculture and fishing practices. We have a goal to improve the percent of MSC and ASC seafood products we sell at Costco. We feel they are industry leaders in sustainability efforts for both wild-caught and aquaculture seafood products. And lastly, we've also adopted a new seafood policy that prohibits the sale of seafood listed on the endangered or critically endangered list. We monitor these lists as they are updated and conduct self-audits to ensure compliance. Next, we look at forest conservation efforts. For wood, pulp, and paper, we ask ourselves if this is sourced from a responsibly managed forest. Costco accepts forest management certification from 3 leading organizations, FSC, SFI, and PEFC. We strive to have this certification for all of our private label items and encourage our greater supplier community to move in this direction as well. For beef and soybean, we ask ourselves if it's sourced from a low deforestation risk-free area. And really, this goes back to the importance of supply chain mapping that we talked about earlier. Soy can be a major driver of deforestation in areas such as Brazil. And as such, all of our Kirkland Signature products we source are from either the US and Canada, where the practices are more sustainable. For cocoa, we look at if it's from a verified program that addresses child labor and deforestation. And finally, for palm oil, is it certified and sustainably sourced? Costco is a member of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, and we are committed to ensuring that the palm oil in all of our products we sell is certified by this body. And then the next question we ask ourselves as buyers is whether the best possible packaging is being used. For Costco, this means the 6 rights of packaging sustainability. The first being the right reduction. Examples of this include using less plastic in our packaging, moving away from things such as rigid PET tubs that house our Kirkland Signature snacking cashews. And we're testing using a bag that actually uses 85% less plastic. We look at the right amount of post-consumer recyclable material. An example of this in our system is all of our food court pizza boxes that we use are made from 100% recycled content. We look at the right fiber. This goes back to what I was talking about earlier, utilizing certified forest content, FSC on many of our Kirkland Signature items, such as our bath tissue and in a lot of our packaging. We look at the right recyclable packaging. Is the material conducive for recycling systems globally? The right certified compostable packaging. And finally, the right label. Will our members understand how to recycle? It's our job to ensure we are communicating that on all of our products. And lastly, we take a look at emissions, both internally and with our suppliers, and plans to reduce them. We recognize the urgency to reduce our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and are committed to doing our part. And we first started internally with our company to get our own house on track with our scope 1 and 2 emissions with business processes that we control. And we do monitor that to show progress year over year. Finally, we last year surveyed over our top 500 suppliers for their emissions and got a 93% response rate. This gives us confidence that this is a focus industry-wide and that all are focused on making improvements in this area. And lastly, there's a lot of information and a lot of different efforts that Costco as a retailer are putting forth in the sustainability space, more than I can talk about in 15 minutes today. So I would encourage anyone who is curious or would just like to be educated further to visit, Costco.com. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, we do have a link to sustainability where you can read many of our different commitments, goals, and things we're just challenging ourselves, supplier community, and the greater retail community at large in this space. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you, Stacey. We have time now for some questions. A couple have come in via text. So first one is, what entry-level job titles exist in CSR and business ESG reporting that we need to tell our students about? I teach in an economics of sustainability course here at the University of Florida, and I would like to have all my students secure an internship opportunity at the very least in this area?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I will do my best to answer. I come from the buying side of things, but I do know that this is becoming more and more of a focus at Costco. We actually, a number of years ago, and it's grown since then, we have developed a sustainability department where we have a dedicated team to all of this, all of our goals and monitoring ESG reporting. And so, I would say for anyone who is interested in looking at that space, to whether it's Deborah or Philip, find a way to reach out to myself or people at Costco, because we do have opportunities in that space. The department is, it's small, but it is growing because these are complicated things that we're trying to solve and make progress on. And it takes a tremendous amount of effort of reporting, of networking with suppliers. And so I know it's an area we are focused on growing out, and we can always use talent at every level, especially for people really passionate in this industry.
And there are definitely lots of students that are interested in. So it's a great question, and thank you for that answer. So a follow-up question. You mentioned from someone else, you mentioned continuous improvement is one of Costco's principles. Could you talk about something that didn't go well and what the organization learned from it?
That's a good question. It's hard to say, trying to think of something that didn't go well. What I will say to that is, part of what makes some of these goals challenging is meeting our supplier communities where they're at, we recognize we have tremendous kind of influence as a retailer on the products we can choose to buy or not choose to buy and sell. But it takes time. We'll put out there target goals and dates, but it is really working to change industries. I think, a big one that's a focus, I touched on it briefly, is open pen gestation for sows. That is something that is becoming more and more of a focus here at Costco, especially with, the California, the prop and all of those regulations, but it does take money, time to convert those breeding houses in our supplier communities. So it's, I would say it's not that it's not going well, but it's continually having to partner with those suppliers on a timeline and adjusting and holding them to just the same goals and timelines that we put forth, because they're the ones making those investments to change that industry. And we see that with the open pen, we see that with cage-free eggs, and there's also a balance with the cost of the products, because it does increase cost to raise the animals. It's the right thing to do. We fully believe that. But, we also have to bring our members along with us and sure we're educating them too, because there's a balance between what they'll pay for something versus, what the right thing to do is. And I think as long as we're making small strides towards improving that and changing the industries as a whole, we're going to eventually get to a space where that's more common practice. We see that in other countries, I think that are a little further along, like our European countries and Australia. They're much more progressive in some of these animal welfare initiatives. And the community there has adopted that, and they recognize that, and they just understand that that's quality and that's the right thing to do. And there isn't a question. So I think we'll get there at some point in time. It's just, you got to continue to chip away at it and partner with the right suppliers who want to make that investment.
Right. No, and your next question, I think you've already just answered it, but maybe you'll take a little deeper dive on this. The question is, have you seen Costco affect suppliers and encourage them to change their own business practices, change what they sell, or change what they sell? For example, have you seen egg suppliers switch to cage-free eggs? Curious if you have any anecdotes. Well, do you have any additional examples or follow-up for that question?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely have. I think, we post on our internet page, and that's under the sustainability. Every year we post our progress in cage-free, and I'm encouraged to say that each year that percentage of cage-free eggs that we sell does increase. And even in some parts of the world, like Asia, where it's a little bit behind, in those practices. We do have suppliers that are making that investment. They've actually traveled to the US, met with us, met with US egg suppliers to understand and educate themselves on that space. And while it's maybe a slower, progression, they are making those investments and changing. We have seen really become adopted is, I talked a bit about the ASC and MSC certification for seafood. That's a big one for us too. It's, it's a very, it's an industry that's very easy to take advantage of, to overfish, and not ensure that the resources are put back for growing and that it's going to be there season after season. And more of our supplier communities on their own, we find, are going out, partnering with MSC and ASC on learning about best fishing practices, getting the certification, ensuring they can map their supply chain all the way to food source that, fish food, the feed that goes to the fish. And so, we're encouraged that, we're focused on it, but we're starting to see our supplier community focus on that themselves and come to us with these answers even before, we ask the question, which is encouraging.
Yes, and now we have another question. That's kind of sparking a chain of questions here. How much responsibility should consumers bear, such as recycling properly, versus firms reducing packaging by offering products in bulk or taking ownership of the post-consumer waste themselves, as legislated in some other markets?
Yeah, that's a good question. And absolutely something that I think Costco, we try and take a look at the full life cycle of an item, all the way from production to how it's disposed of. And I think, again, there's a balance, and that might look different in different parts of the world. I touched on that one example with our Kirkland Signature cashews. Is if you're familiar with the item, it used to come in a big tub. We've now moved to a plastic bag. It's reduced 85% of the plastic in that packaging, but that packaging is not recyclable now. So, there's a balance. When we looked at the percentage, of products that people recycle here in the US versus the reduction we could take out, we found that for right now, this was actually a better solution, because I forget the exact percentage, but, not a lot of people take it upon themselves to recycle today. And, so do we go the route of the PET tub where they can recycle, but most people aren't? Or do we go the route where we just remove the plastic? Now, a win-win, and something we are working on, is how do we stay in a bag like that has 85% less plastic, but is also recyclable. So, continual efforts, challenging our packaging suppliers to get more creative in that space too. But I think that kind of hopefully helps answer that question, because yes, sometimes, it is the responsibility, and we want to try and make everything as recycle friendly as possible. But we also understand that balance where, we're not quite there today. Some regions, even here in the US, have better infrastructure for recycling versus others. And so we try and do our best to kind of understand that and cater to that. Right.
No, it's an important topic and an interesting one. Got two more questions. I think we have time for just these two. Stacey, at Costco, do you see any trends in consumer behavior in terms of purchasing habits in organic products, regeneratively grown products, any insights by regions within the US or outside? And then the second question says, it's more of a comment saying, even items that are put in recycled aren't actually recycled, disconnect there, so it's with the question
Absolutely.
About how effective recycling is.
Yeah.
So one comment, and then that question about
organics.
So trends in consumer behavior.
Yeah. So just to round out the recycling on that comment, agree. And that's why we recognize that and look at it from multiple angles. And it's an education too. We try and look at making the item as easy as possible, because sometimes if you throw an item in to recycling, if it has the wrong label on a plastic bottle, it will get rejected in the downstream recycling. So, we're challenging ourselves to look at all components, labeling as such, educating, cap has to go here, can't be recycled, the label needs to be removed. it's complicated. It should be easier than it is, but it is complicated. So recognize that. And then the question on organics and regenerative growth, you know, I do see that is continues to be a growing trend here, especially in North America. We have many regions, you know, I would say probably the West Coast is pretty progressive in this space, kind of demanding more and more organics, demanding produce that's been, you know, hothouse grown, you know, and just cleaner with less pesticides. You know, it is a little harder when you look at this on a global scale to, you know, organics doesn't translate the same way. And it's actually often quite hard to export organic items from the US to certain parts of the world. I know this because I ship a lot of food products all over the world, but you know, we're slowly starting to see people become more and more interested in organics. I would say Europe's probably a little more progressive in this space than Asia. But it's something that, you know, as a retailer, we feel that, you know, it does offer quality to consumers. And, you know, we're going to continue to grow as we see, you know, the trend grow. But here in the US, I would say it's very important and really heavy adopter, especially on the two coasts. But we're starting to see more and more of that, you know, creep into the Midwest, to the Texas region. You know, organics is big for us. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Stacey, for all these insights and
you.
answering all those questions. We'll move on now to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Kristiane Davidson. She will speak on powering the ethical supply chain. Kristiane has been working in sustainability for the last 12 years, exploring different fields, including infrastructure, energy, and supply chains in Asia Pacific, Europe, and the Americas. She has been the head of impact and sustainability with US-based company To The Market for the last 2.5 years. She is committed to promoting initiatives that are better for people and the planet. Kristiane, I'll turn it to you.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for that introduction. My name, as Phil said, is Kristiane, and I am the head of impact and sustainability at the US-based startup called To The Market, but I'm based in Europe, and I'm just going to share my screen here. I'm sorry that it's dark in the background. In Paris, it's nighttime. So, all right, let's turn this to presentation mode. Right, so let me start today's lightning talk by talking a little bit about To The Market and what we do, and then I will explore 3 major European sourcing and supply chain trends from 2022. So, To The Market is a women-owned technology-enabled B Corp providing transparency in the supply chain, allowing retailers, brands, and corporations to procure goods and to quantify the impact of their procurement. Using seamless end-to-end workflow management, we provide turnkey supply chain management to our clients, who consist of Fortune 500 corporations and major retailers and brands. All of this is enabled by our online platform, which includes our vendor scorecard, which is used to score suppliers on their environmental, social, and business performance. And by supplier, it can be an artisan or a factory. And working with a vetted, diverse network of over 200 syndicated suppliers in over 60 countries, including the US, our ethical supply chain solution enables better manufacturing, connecting companies with quality products, along with transparency, impact metrics, and rich storytelling. And I know that can all sound a bit nebulous, so put very simply, we source ethical and sustainable goods, and that can include apparel, accessories, or home goods for our clients from our network of vetted suppliers. And this work includes managing the production and transportation of these goods. So this means that we are engaged at several points along the supply chain. And it also means that our business is highly influenced by both macro and regional specific trends. And with clients, logistics partners, and some suppliers, located throughout Europe. We have plenty of experience with the European context. So let's explore that some more. So the first trend, and really the major trend for European sourcing in 2022, was that of supply chain shocks and the accumulation of disruption. As you can imagine, this was primarily caused by global and regional events, including COVID, as well as the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the associated energy crisis, as well as changes to the global economy, including inflation rate rises. Now, of course, this disruption, or some of these disruptions, are being felt across supply chains globally, but Europe has been particularly affected due to the regional unrest. So according to a study by Accenture, depending on the length and severity of the war, the cost of supply chain disruption in the Eurozone across 2022 and 2023 could reach up to 920 billion euros, which is the equivalent of 7.7% of the regional GDP. And further, according to the IMF, existing supply chain disruptions can add to inflation, which can then further undermine economic recovery in Europe. So this trend was is very important, had pretty real and potentially lasting impacts on the European supply chains, but on the entire economy. So to give you some examples of the types of impacts that we witnessed in our work at To The Market, this is to be imagined, price increases, as well as delays to both production and to transportation. So now these impacts have an obvious ripple effect up and down the value chain. But what was of particular relevance to our business was the effect that it was having on the affordability and availability of ethical and sustainable goods. So as some of the other panelists mentioned, sometimes more ethical and sustainable goods can attract a premium. And so any price changes will, of course, be, affecting that even more, making them more expensive. And part of that premium is to cover the cost of fair wages and to support some of the processes and technology needed to develop more sustainable materials. So for us, it's been extremely important in our response to these impacts that we remained mission aligned and avoided squeezing the margins of our suppliers. So in order to meet the overall pricing challenge, the approach that we have taken is to work with logistics partners to redesign alternative supply chains, including, for example, looking at inventory storage capabilities that are closer to our customers and therefore less able to be disrupted. We've also been working with more non-traditional suppliers, and which has enabled us to avoid some of the delays altogether, which has been great. And we've also been less reliant on more frequently used partners. Then we've also been able to spread production across our vast network and increase focus also on production, nearshoring options for production. And overall, this has been good for our clients and for our suppliers, which is important. And we've managed quite well despite the disruptions. And I believe that these sort of approaches could be taken by anyone in the supply chain to be able to sort of meet, trends like disruption, which unfortunately continues into this year. So the second trend is transparency, which we've observed to be pursued for two particular reasons last year. One was to reduce further disruption risk, so acknowledging the first trend. And the second one was to ensure ethical and sustainable standards are being upheld. So to the first point, according to a KPMG study in 2022, companies invested more in technologies to help with increasing visibility across extended supply chains and to boost responsiveness to major disruptions. And at To The Market, we have certainly seen an increased interest from our clients in the capabilities of our online platform, where it facilitates supply chain mapping and contains detailed information about supplier reliability through our vendor scorecards. To the second point, transparency has been increasingly codified into European laws. So to promote supply chains that are better for people and for the planet. Most notably in February of last year, the European Commission presented a proposal for a law on corporate sustainability obligations. And then at the end of last year in December, the European member countries agreed to an EU-wide supply chain law called now it's currently called the Draft European Supply Chain Act. This will require that EU companies carefully manage social and environmental impact along their entire value chain, including direct and indirect suppliers, as well as their own operations, products, and services. So the law aims to require certain countries that operate within Europe, so not just European companies, to avoid harming the environment, fully respect human rights, and promote responsible corporate governance all the way along their supply chain, and be able to have full traceability into that supply chain. So this is about doing better business from the top down and being able to prove it with maximum transparency. Now, as you can imagine, this regulation has the potential to have a significant impact, where one study shows that currently only 6% of corporations have full visibility into their supply chains. However, it is a long way from the floor of the European Assembly to the factory floor. And the risk of regulation non-compliance is increasing with more and more regulations being passed. So in my experience working with suppliers, most of them are working with different clients from several jurisdictions, and some of them, they struggle to meet all of these requirements, which can include national and regional laws, as well as global certifications and standards, as well as auditing frameworks, and sometimes customer-specific mandatory checklists. And this can mean potentially days of unpaid paperwork preparation and meetings with third parties before a client has even placed an order with a supplier. So there are some challenges there in being more transparent. Another challenge with this type of regulation is that enterprise clients often lack the expertise and bandwidth to identify the alternative supply chain solutions, which would be needed to be more transparent. And this lack of expertise can be attributed partly to the fact that some Fortune 500 retailers and corporations work with legacy brokerage firms that generally have optimized, as you can imagine, for price and speed, but not so much for transparency. So we can see that this regulation challenges clients and suppliers, but in observing the trends, thankfully, voters and consumers are in step with regulators. So a survey of consumers showed that 71% of respondents would be willing to change their shopping habits to support brands that provide greater traceability. And our client feedback certainly agrees with this, finding that more and more of them are, demanding more detailed product descriptions and clearer labeling for their ethical and sustainable products. And with transparency at the heart of what we do, we're continuing to help and field inquiries from clients and from our suppliers, to meet these challenges and to provide guidance on new regulation and, understanding shifting consumer expectations. We feel really strongly that information sharing, capacity building, and collaboration are key to achieving, and being in line with this trend of transparency. And the third trend is that we've observed in 2022 is circularity. So as one of the most polluting industries in the world, retail, for example, has an especially challenging future and a significant need for change. And thankfully, circularity has become an increasingly trendy topic, as it has been recognized that it can solve many of the environmental issues faced by the retail industry. So whereby a circular supply chain can minimize the use of raw materials and minimize discarded materials, as it can involve the reuse or repurposing of waste, like in the garment industry, for example, offcuts and dead stock, and maybe even customer returns. And so these can be used in the production of new or refurbished goods. For example, the production of a t-shirt made from recycled cotton that may have been, come from cotton t-shirts, previously used and worn. So in the last year or so, specifically in Europe, there have been about 16 relevant legislations being developed or reviewed by the European Commission to account for circularity, with laws spanning topics like material technology to hazardous chemical use to infrastructure investment. And at the center of all these changes is the new Circular Economy Action Plan, which has been adopted by the European Commission. That was in March of last year. And it's one of the main building blocks of the European Green Deal, which is Europe's new agenda for sustainable growth. Now, this action plan introduces both legislative and non-legislative measures, and where appropriate, the Commission is going to consider ways to regulate aspects like improving a product's durability, reusability, upgradability, and repairability, addressing the presence of hazardous chemicals, and increasing their energy and resource efficiency. It might require products, for example, to contain more recycled content, and it might require the reduction of a supply chain's carbon and environmental footprint. So at the same time, in March of last year, the Commission released a set of initiatives that are a bit more specific to retail sector and supply chains, including a reform of eco-design laws and a strategy for more sustainable and circular textiles. And regulating circularity will require significant shifts in traditional supply chains, as you can imagine. And I believe it will require a generous runway before it can really take off. But most importantly, I think it will require end user demand. And thankfully, the good news is that circularity is already, or appears to already be a priority for consumers. A couple of the other panelists mentioned this. So a recent survey indicated that 60% of consumers are ready to change their purchasing behavior to minimize their environmental footprint. And with 73% of Gen Z consumers willing to pay more for sustainable products. Further, a World Economic Forum survey found that 9 out of 10 respondents would like to see more sustainable and equitable products in the post-pandemic market. So to the market, we have certainly, where I work, certainly seen high demand for products and packaging that is made of recycled, recyclable, and upcycled materials. In fact, actually last year, we placed one of our largest orders for recycled cotton products, and it was with a European client. We've also seen more demand for end-of-life recycling services, which we are able to provide as an option for our clients and their customers in partnership with a European company, where we can, a customer can send back their goods, and these can be used to make, as I said before, maybe recycled cotton to be used for the future production of products. So in summary, despite the major shocks and disruptions of the past year, and despite the potential for future shocks as we see climate change impact intensify, I am encouraged by the adoption of the regulations for more sustainable sourcing. This is definitely a priority for Europe. And I'm also encouraged by the increasing support from consumers themselves. And I really believe that the role of companies like To The Market and these sorts of supply chain partners will continue to grow, as there's a significant need for more ethical and sustainable and more non-traditional sourcing partners, so that we can shift supply chains to be better for people and for the planet. Thank you. I think I just ran right out of time.
No, thank you, Kristiane. Perfect. Perfect timing, and we have time for some questions. And I don't see any in the chat or the Q&A at the second, but I have one. Which is, you mentioned how the EU laws, a lot of EU laws, impact if you're a company, even an overseas company, if you're active in Europe, those laws impact you. And Europe has become a regulatory leader in a lot of areas, impacting global companies. including US companies. So how are US companies responding to these changes? Are they becoming kind of more aware and more responsive? And are they trying to now, because of this, trying to influence European Commission or EU policymaking?
Oh, so much in that question. Maybe I can start with one observation, which is that certainly, as you said, Europe tends to be a little bit more advanced when it comes to these sort of sustainability related regulations. For example, you've seen that maybe this is on the finance side. There have been many regulations to do with due diligence and reporting that was introduced in Europe. And then you saw maybe a year later that the US emulated and created a similar regulation. So I think the influence tends to be from Europe to the US on these sort of sustainability policies. And I think that's the direction, right? As I said, if we look at consumer expectations, it's certainly for there to be a move more into that direction, and that, and we've seen new, even in the US, as the introduction of new laws related to the sourcing of cotton from certain areas within China, and the need for more understanding of where certain cotton is coming from, making sure that the persons that are involved in the production of, and the agricultural side are protected, and everything like this. So there's more and more of these types of I believe more on the transparency side regulations, and I know that circularity is becoming more and more at the front of the mind anyway of the industry and of major brands and retailers. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, no, thank you. Excellent. So we got two more questions here. First one is with regard to transparency and companies understanding sources in their supply chain. What are some opportunities you see, for example, technology, cultural, et cetera?
Yes, I mean, I think, I'm a huge fan of transparency, right? And I believe, this is spoken about by some of the other panelists. I think the opportunity is the more that we understand, the more that we have the possibility, we being the industry, we being consumers, have the opportunity to make better choices, or make choices that are more value aligned, perhaps, make, therefore use our dollar to influence, the companies that we're buying from. So I think there's an opportunity there. And, the more that we understand, what's going on in the supply chain, the more data we have, then we have really a baseline to make improvements. Then we can say, okay, well, this is an area where we probably could do better, and there's an opportunity for improving packaging. There's an opportunity for optimizing, how we're shipping goods. Should we be working closer to home? I think it's going to be a lot about understanding what's going on up and down the value chain, and sharing that information, and then making decisions from there. And I think the inevitable trend is moving towards making better choices, right? I mean, I'm making an assumption here that everyone wants to be sustainable and ethical, but I think that with so many global trends, including climate change, that makes financial sense as well.
Great, thank you. The next question is, Kristiane, from the slide in circular economy, consumer demand for sustainable products, especially Gen Z, seems robust. How is the supply side doing in terms of coming up with innovations and meeting that demand? What are the key barriers that you see in demand for the demand to translate into viable products?
I mean, in the work that we're doing, certainly that, there's two parts to it, of course. I mean, our suppliers are constantly seeking to improve their operations. They're getting certifications. They're participating in third-party audits. And, in order to get some of these certifications, it means that they're improving their facilities to be more environmentally friendly. And they're also, adopting social programs, programs that support the community. And this is, I believe, because there's sort of a groundswell of workers who are expecting better working environments. There's improvements in regulation. There's improvements of in demand from clients for those environments to improve. But I think also they want to do better, and it's more competitive for them to be better because there are more questions being asked from the demand side, right? And I think it's interesting. But in terms of materials that are used, a supply side, a supplier factory can source and provide a number of materials, sustainable and non-sustainable, but really it's up to whether the client is looking for that kind of product. And I mean, our business is working exclusively with clients that come to us because they are looking for ethical and sustainable products from ethical and sustainable suppliers. So our experience is that there is a demand, and there's an increasing demand, and but maybe the fact that they're coming to us means that it's not yet normalized, and that there is maybe some more capacity building, more information that needs to be shared from the demand side. And, I think I mentioned in there that consumers are, chomping at the bit. They're ready to go. They want to buy these more sustainable products, but maybe the offering isn't there. So if anything, maybe there's a small bottleneck in the those people designing and marketing products. The consumers are ready, and the supply chain, the supply side, are ready to go. And I think we just have to make sure that we are developing and offering and producing these more ethical and sustainable products.
Great, thank you. We've got time to get in this one final question, comment. I'm surprised more clothing retailers aren't more involved with mass customization. So much of it, what is thrown away is ill-fitting fast fashion. I see a big opportunity for a return to bespoke items, ideally made from natural materials. Am I alone in this view?
I a big one. I mean, I'm not working in a fast fashion organization, and so I can't speak on behalf of that, and we're not working with any fast fashion organizations, but we are working with major retailers. And what we've seen as they're approaching these ethical and sustainable products is they're being very sort of thoughtful about production. And the way we work is it's a little bit on demand, if you will. I know that you're talking about this questions about bespoke, and I think on demand production speaks to and sort of facilitates that a bit more. But I think that on the supply side, it's very difficult to produce one beautiful piece in within the price and timing expectations of many consumers. And that's why we have many factories that have minimum quantities that they produce, because they have to optimize their production line and make sure that everything is working efficiently so they can pay their workers properly, and also be able to offer a competitively priced product, also whilst considering ethical and sustainable. So I do agree that bespoke products are more sustainable, as you say, less waste. I think that these, smaller capsule orders will help also reduce some waste and making also thoughtful buying. And I would say that, we are working with our clients, for example, to understand when we're doing placing repeat orders, understand sort of what worked last time, and also working with them, as I said, on these end of life options. So we work with a partner in Europe where we will collect the goods that weren't used, weren't sold, or the goods that may have been used, and a customer has finished using that lovely piece and they can send it back. And then all of those products are sent to this partner, and they are broken down and made into new fabric. And so that speaks to the circularity trend that I spoke about. So, I mean, there are other options whilst we're making the transition to a more ethical and sustainable mode of doing things, you know, whilst we move towards maybe the bespoke model. But during this transition, you know, we have to look at some of these other options, and I think they're there. And I think that's, you know, it's a great opportunity to develop them, you know, before we take the next step.
All right, thank you. All good food for thought and action. So thank you, Kristiane. I'll now go to our final speaker. Our final speaker is Kiki Anderson. She will speak on Change Your Clothes, Change the World, Join the Fashion Revolution. Inspired by the Gandhi quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." Nikki founded one of the first exclusively fair trade clothing boutiques in the country over a decade ago. Nikki is committed to transforming the fashion industry by making ethically sourced garments more accessible to customers as she educates the community about the importance of being socially conscious consumer. Nikki, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for having me. I'm really grateful to be on such an esteemed panel, and I'm glad for following Kristiane. I think this is a nice dovetail off of the information she shared, and I love the inspiration that I gleaned from her sharing of best practices, that Europe is definitely ahead of the curve and setting a great example for what the rest of us can do. I'm going to speak to what the fast fashion industry is doing, because I think it's important to establish the gravity of the situation, and that we truly are in a point of crisis, and that if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. I will spend a couple minutes in the beginning sharing a trailer for a movie, a documentary about the impact that the fast fashion industry is having on global water sources. And I'm hoping that this will motivate you, as it has me, to find your part in this and how you can be part of the solution. So with no further ado, here is that.
We have a very small amount of water, and that's got to accommodate the needs that humans have for drinking water. And a lot of that water is not accessible.
We are committing hydrocide. We are deliberately murdering our rivers.
Our rivers across the world were being deeply impacted by the dumping of poisonous toxic material.
Every single piece of clothing that you buy comes with a cost.
The fabric dyes used to contain hazardous materials, things like mercury, cadmium, lead.
These kind of chemicals, they don't break down, and they travel around the world.
This water is so toxic, there is no aquatic life.
If you see how people are living there, they have lost their sensory adaptation. They can't smell anymore.
They do have problems with drinking water supply. There's a high incidence of liver cancers.
If it continues like this, it's done. It's done.
Maybe it's because the demand of the world has gone crazy.
The statistics are insane. Something like 80 billion garments of clothes are being delivered out of factories.
Those products are actually sold to the world's biggest brand names.
A lot of companies do things that are very, very hidden and very secret.
So the pipe is underground. You cannot really see this factory that is dumping this.
You don't learn the details because at the end of the day, it's not a selling point.
The consumer did not wake up one morning saying, I want to buy 5 pairs of jeans for a fraction of the price. We were literally introduced to this concept by the fashion industry.
If you have 2 jeans, one is damaging the planet, the other one no, and the price is the same, no one will choose the wrong one. I mean, there's no excuse.
I think all corporations have to be accountable for their environmental practices, and no one has a right to damage or destroy a river.
Okay, so I know that's hard to watch, but I think it's important to actually see the damage that's being caused. And that's just, that's not even touching on the greenhouse gas emissions or the landfill waste problems. But I think that gives you some sort of an idea of the scope of the problem. And I think what I'm going to speak about next is something that Kristiane alluded to, which is that transparency is at the crux of unraveling this problem. And while it sounds like a lot of European brands and Europe as a country, is taking strides to require transparency on the part of brands, in the US, we're not there yet. And I think that what has happened is that in response to this customer demand for some sort of accountability from brands, what's happened is that they are disclosing, and what I think constitutes greenwashing, they are talking about their tier 1 production processes, and they are completely burying their tier 2, 3, and 4 stages of the process. And they refer to these stages as wet processing. So I think that they can do some window dressing to try to make strides on tier 1, but the vast majority of the environmental destruction is happening at these other layers of the supply chain. And those layers are subcontracted out by the tier 1 supplier. So the brand will just have a contract with the tier 1 supplier, and then they can turn a blind eye to what's happening at these other tiers of the process. So it's a convenient setup for the brands to evade accountability. This is just one of the resources I found that kind of breaks down among the 62 largest brands, fast fashion brands, where they stand on traceability and transparency. So you can see there's a lot of room for improvement across the board. And this is just, I wanted to include, I know that I won't have time to go into a lot of the details, but if you refer back to this for reference purposes, it is a great tool to look at. If you happen to be a fan of one of these brands, you can be informed about how they're running their business. See, this is another great tool. So if I had one takeaway from this presentation, if you could all just download this app, I think that would be a great step in the right direction. So this app, Good On You, they give brands an ethical grade, so to speak. So they're either ranked as great, good, it's a start, not good enough, or avoid. So when going to, say, a mall, if you're inclined to do so, you could put in 2 stores, each of them, just plug it in, and then it would pull up sort of their environmental rating. And you can make an informed decision as a customer about where you want to spend your dollars. So great tool. Another awesome tool is Fashion Revolution. So this is their website, I guess, is the main place to go to access these tools. But they provide templates of, you can write letters to brands to push for change. There are petitions you can sign to support regulatory change. Yes, like no matter who you are, if you're coming from the customer perspective or an educator or a journalist, there's some tool that they provide to help you take your next step in being part of the solution. Another great resource is FiberShed. So this is a nonprofit organization, and they are primarily geared toward helping people at the sourcing at the agricultural step, the first tier of the supply chain. So they have developed a tool that, sorry, I'm looking at my notes, that is a climate beneficial fiber verification tool. So this is, again, a great resource so that we can measure these things and know if what we are wearing has abided by these standards. They've also written a book that is providing a template for farm to closet model of clothing production. And one of the pilot programs that came out of FiberShed was this one by Kristiane. It's a brand based in California, and they had been primarily sourcing all of their fabric for their clothing from dead stock. So that's often what people will say, this is made from recycled fabric. And in a sense it is, because that fabric would have ended up in a landfill. Because the dead stock is referring to the extra yardage that when a fast fashion brand is making something, it's on such a large scale. And then if they don't use all of the fabric for which they typically, there's lots of excess yardage on a roll. They just throw that into a landfill. So dead stock is something that sustainable brands will purchase to save that from otherwise going to a landfill. So in addition, they felt like, Dawn felt like they could do more in terms of sustainability because as we all know, the status quo, sustainability means we're going to, net zero, stay where we are. And we need to do better. We need to not just do no harm, but we need to add value. So they have developed a land stewardship project. And this is to finance in a very creative way regenerative farming practices. So as I had said, that it's very atypical for a brand to have a direct relationship with the producer of the fibers that are going to be in the clothing that they're making. So this is a creative way to connect these pieces of the puzzle. So the consumer, they were selling 500 plots of land for farmers in India to convert their land from conventional farming practices that were very toxic and polluting to regenerative farming practices. So for each plot of land, they quantified that it would be sequestering 480 pounds of carbon from being released to the atmosphere. So it's a measurable impact. And then each plot of land would require an investment from a customer of $200. And then that $200 could be recouped in the form of credit toward the purchase of a garment. So it's the typical model that you see a lot in food agriculture, where you can get a CSA or community supported agriculture like share into a farm. And what this does is it takes the risk out of investing in these practices. Typically the farmer is required to make that risk of investment. And this is saying, unlike in most contractual agreements in the fashion industry, you usually are just doing it on speculation that they're growing this, but there's no commitment from the brand to purchase that fiber. So this is saying, I guarantee that what you produce, I will buy. So this investment is supported and it's not, the risk isn't put on the farmer. This report provides a wealth of information, and I included it for a few reasons. I wanted to give these two organizations sort of a shout out, would you say, the Apparel Impact Institute and Fashion for Good. Both of these provide great resources. So again, if this speaks to you in some way, these are good next steps to go to seek more information and get involved with either of these. This report is just chock full of great information, and they're providing sort of a roadmap for pathway to net zero by 2050 in the fashion industry. So they cover a lot of ground. I was just going to highlight some of the examples of producers that I thought were interesting and innovative. So this business, which I think Kristiane might have been referring, I don't know if this is the name, and she can let me know, but Renew Cell is doing what she was speaking of, which is they're taking used textiles that would otherwise be sent to a landfill, and they are repurposing them, and they are making those into a pulp, and then that pulp is turned into a new fiber, which they have named Circulose, and then the Circulose is sold, and it's 100% recycled fiber. So this is, I think, genius in a lot of levels, in that it's taking waste, it's removing what would otherwise be going to a landfill, and then it's creating a market for this material. This brand, also referred to in the report, Genealogia, I think they're just super inspiring. And so what they're doing is they've created, they're kind of addressing the problems that I was alluding to in that second and third tier of production, in the wet production part of the process, where there's the dyeing, and when it comes to jeans, the distressing of the fabric. So instead of using what is typically used, which are toxic chemicals and lots of water, they have created a dry processing alternative. So there's no water waste and there are no chemicals. So they're using light and air to accomplish the same goal that they had been using the dye and the water processing for. And the cost, they say, is the same, that you're removing the cost of purchasing the chemicals and of using the water. So the financial cost, I mean, certainly the environmental cost is, night and day difference. But even the financial cost is the same. So they also, I think, genius is that they've integrated the process so that this model that has not been serving us, which is that there's this very disjointed supply chain, they are actually making the thing that they're selling. So there's not this line of middlemen involved in the process. They, have transparency and they have informed decisions because they're the ones making it. And I think it's great that they're targeting jeans because jeans are notoriously one of the most polluting, toxic of all the garments in the fashion industry. They've also created a great tool. So this EIM that they have, it's a global standard for measuring the environmental impact of a garment. So this gives us as consumers a great way to know what we're getting. So they've, I'll share the next slide, kind of more about how they have developed that tool and what goes into come up with the ratings. But again, huge tool, and this is shared industry-wide. So I know other similar producers are able to use this, and I think that's great that it's not about competition, it's about sharing the good information that we have so we can all do better. I'm going to switch now to wrapping it up with kind of how I fit into the puzzle. So my little role is I have a fair trade clothing boutique. Just without saying any more, a huge benefit that my model of business has over traditional stores you'll have in a mall is that the fair trade and slow fashion industry operates with 2 cycles per year. And as opposed to the fast fashion industry having 50 cycles per year. So you can just very easily understand the difference in how much waste and pollution there is with that difference. So as a fair trade store, I source from all brands that abide by the World Fair Trade Organization's 10 principles of fair trade. So typically when I've been asked to present on these things, I'm usually speaking to the workplace environment in the tier 1 and how workers are being treated or mistreated typically. But it was good for me to do the research to understand more specifically how the need for fair trade is also important to preserve the environment, that they're inextricably linked. The people and planet are not mutually exclusive. So knowing the indirect impact on people because of the direct impact on the environment, it serves me well and further motivates me to keep on doing what I'm doing. So this is a helpful example, I think, of what a store like mine will do. Is the dress on the left is by a brand named Known Supply, and you'll find them if you use that tool. Good on you. That you will see that they have a ranking of great, that they are checking all the boxes in terms of full transparency, fair trade certified, B Corporation, fair price, and organic fibers. So most stores you'll walk into, they will kind of use smoke and mirrors to make the dress on the right look like, an equal alternative. But we as consumers can do our work to understand that what on face value might look like comparable items, there really should be no question of which one is the right one to buy. So I feel good about what I carry is, I think, equal in terms of style and then far superior in terms of quality. So by creating a store like this, I'd say the vast majority of stores that you'll walk into in a town like the one I live in, they're going to have the dress on the right. So by making a space that you can come into and access very easily the dress on the left, I think that's providing a great service. I'm also very passionate about providing a space to have these conversations. So I know a lot of these brands exclusively exist online, and I think that the need for a brick and mortar store is really important. Known Supply, for example, each garment is signed by the maker that made the garment, and then it tells the story. You can scan a barcode and actually engage with that artisan. So we're trying to make personal what has become really disconnected. And so anyway, brick and mortar is important to me. And so yeah, in closing, I hope that we all can find a way to take action. You can see from the Fashion Revolution website that they will break down whether you are a journalist, a student, a business person, a teacher, or just a shopper, a consumer. They give you a pathway that you can go on for how you can be part of the solution and get involved, and we all can make a difference. And I know I've been inspired by all the things shared today, and I hope that you all are as well. So I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, we have, first is actually just a question to, if you could restate the name of the program or organization that works to de-risking farmers for the products they generate.
Fiber Shed.
Yeah, Fiber Shed.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So that was one comment. And then the other one is a question. As someone who has been active in sustainable fashion, are you seeing positive trends? Is the industry moving in the right direction?
Yes, great question. And I can say it's twofold, I guess. The fast fashion industry is still very much alive and well, much to my chagrin. And I think there's been a huge setback since COVID because they just canceled orders. So when everything went into lockdown, they were under no obligation, morally or otherwise, or contractually, to actually fulfill the orders that they had placed. And then the working conditions are even more deplorable because everyone's just trying to cut costs. And the people in developing countries are so desperate for any employment that they just take it on the chin. So it's twofold in that I think the fast fashion industry is as damaging and corrupt as ever. But I see that these alternative, like what Kristiane was alluding to, that there's a lot, the demand is manifesting in people thinking outside the box and alternatives. So I wanted to mention that too, that part of the reason that the fair trade, the brands I carry, are working with artisans in developing countries is that we're trying to undo the damage that's been done. That I think there's a role for all of this, that more domestic produced goods, that's important too. But I think it would be criminal to have done what we did in the US by transferring all the production of our garments and creating this demand overseas in developing countries and then polluting and then pulling out. That we've done what we've done and we need to right the wrong. And so what the brands I'm sourcing from do is that they are located in these same communities and they're providing alternatives so that those workers and those farmers have another option instead of just having to do business with fast fashion.
Great. No, thank you. That's, I mean, very, very, this is a great, I think, place to call the tools and, kind of ideas you've given for further action and more learning by consumers. It's great. And it's a great place to, I think, now conclude our event. And no further questions. And I think we're just at time. So I want to thank you, Nikki, and all the presenters today for all their insights. And I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to you and again all the speakers, and as do all my colleagues, to all the audience for joining us. And again, for all the presenters who shared their expertise with them. And also to the U.S. Department of Education. We are especially grateful to them because without our Title VI funding for our national resource centers and our centers for global business, these kinds of programs wouldn't be possible. And be sure to check out all of our centers where we hope to see you at another presentation or talk in the future. And thank you all very much and have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you again on behalf of all of us.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.